On behalf of Cobalt, I'm delighted to welcome you at FinReg 2021, an event that has brought together the financial sector, both the market participants as well as the supervisors, in Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania for 3 consecutive years already. Our 2021 virtual event is dedicated to the crowdfunding regulation that has been applicable throughout the European Union as of 10th of November. Within the next hour, I'm pleased to welcome market participants who will share their views and experience related to crowdfunding. Liisa Aizupite from Fintelum, a crowdfunding platform in Latvia. Karin Winkel, who has successfully raised capital for a real estate project through crowdfunding. And Martina Stankevičius from Röntgen, a real estate crowdfunding platform from Lithuania, as well as representatives of the Baltic supervisory authorities. Marina Krasovska from the Financial and Capital Market Commission of Latvia, Siim Tammer from Finantsinspektsioon Estonia, and Jovita Aleksiūna from the Bank of Lithuania. I hope you enjoy our engaging speakers as much as we do. And we wish you all best of luck under the new rules entering into force. Whether you are a project company, a platform or an investor, or a company mapping options for financing growth, we are here to assist you.
Welcome to FinReg Financial Supervisors panel on crowdfunding. It has always been an honor and pleasure to have 3 Baltic financial supervisors in one room, even a virtual one. Today it is the case. We have gathered and to discuss new crowdfunding regulation. The Baltics were indeed seen as one market. Therefore, the concurrence between financial supervisors across the region is very important. Besides, as one of our participants has emphasized during the interviews, that we have yield-starved economies, and crowdfunding regulation might be the solution to tackle this issue. But before we begin the discussion, market participants will share their views and insights, provide some recommendations, so we can, in the panel later, after those recommendations, reflect on them and discuss them.
If you look at the need that arose generally in the market, obviously there was a problem with funds allocation. So we're living in an economy which is yield-starved. That's one. Secondly, we've gone through several crisis moments where it has made banks so wary of lending out that the demand both for projects and for investors has increased. And finally, and this is my favorite point, crowdfunding comes in with innovation, offering very democratic access to everyone. Basically, here's a web page. You could go on a web page, see the project, choose the one that you'd like to invest, and just via a simple process, on-screen process, even on your mobile phone, acquire shares or participate in a debt offering, or even a product or service such as a utility token. So that's the positive innovation part of the whole crowdfunding phenomena. This new regulation does not cover crypto assets and does not actually regulate anything to do with crypto service providers. However, for us as Fintelum, as a platform, we see cryptocurrencies almost like an FDI instrument, a foreign direct investment instrument, where for a small market this could be used as a tool to attract investment in other currencies. So it's almost like a convertible currency which you can invest, which obviously then gets converted into euros because capital can be increased, in our jurisdiction at least, in euros.
In terms of as to how crowdfunding differs from other alternative ways of financing, crowdfunding has had several advantages compared to traditional bank financing, precisely because so far crowdfunding has not been regulated. In case of real estate projects, crowdfunding platforms, for instance, do not require pre-sale of real estate as the banks often do. Pre-sale prices are usually lower compared to the prices the project owner is able to get from the market if the building has already been constructed. Therefore, for a project company, it is relevant to calculate whether it would be more feasible to pre-sell the real estate at a lower price to receive financing from a bank, or pay the high contract fees and higher interest rates usually requested by crowdfunding platforms. The speed of the financing decision is another factor which can be critical for a project. And crowdfunding platforms have a clear advantage here compared to the banks. Also, data on crowdfunding projects reaches thousands, tens of thousands, or in some platforms even hundreds of thousands of investors. This can be perceived as a marketing for the project owner. And the weakness of the crowdfunding platforms in Estonia today is that the size of the projects seem to be limited due to the limitation amount of funds the investors are willing to invest into one project. With the help of crowdfunding platforms, I have raised 1 million euros to one of my projects at the interest rates of 11%. Based on my analysis of the Estonian market, it would be much more difficult to finance, for instance, a 5 million euro project through a crowdfunding platform with a reasonable interest rate.
When comparing crowdfunding to other alternative financial institutions, so like banks or private debt funds, individual lenders or private debt companies, crowdfunding is actually not that much different from them. It's more just about the mechanics that we have behind it. So if we would talk about banks or private debt funds, they would have investors and deposit holders who dedicate their money for the manager to distribute through the investments. When we come to a crowdfunding platform, it's pretty much the same. A platform selects a project and then investors dedicate their capital for this opportunity. I think that at the very beginning there was a misconception that crowdfunding must be definitely related with higher risk, which I believe it definitely not. It's more about what the platform decides where they're focusing, where they're putting their focus to. So for example, here in Lithuania, among our own clients in Röntgen, we have top-tier developers who would definitely be considered bankable, and they have bank loans in some of their projects. But they choose crowdfunding as an alternative, and this alternative becomes more interesting because the platforms are still young, they have small structures, therefore they specialize in unique approach to each project, so they can offer more flexible solutions than banks who are not necessarily conservative, but more need to structure their lending processes so that it would fit, a large portfolio. We find it that actual costs of financing are not that much different. However, the amount of legal work and paperwork, as well as managing the relation with the lender, is considerably lower, which is very valued by the clients of ours.
We will certainly gain a lot from having a uniform regulation across all member states, because up until now, as you well know, the fragmentation resulted in quite unfavorable aspects such as arbitrage, ineffective laws, commercial laws. There's so many drawbacks that are being leveled out, so the level playing field is being evened out for everyone, and hopefully this industry is going to actually flourish instead of die out. Well, that does depend on the final ESMA implementations, on the technical requirements. But if there is not going to be overly restrictive and only burdensome in terms of administration, this industry is bound to grow. Absolutely, there are other points which are very good with regards to the new regulation. One thing that the offering document needs to be rather short, and it's actually stipulated by the new regulation. It's wonderful. It's wonderful that we're all going to be, all service providers, meaning we're all going to be mandated to present to the investor the information that needs to be presented in a coherent, short, succinct way. And that's absolutely great. So 6 pages plus annexes, that makes for a very readable material. What's more, you are not obliged to translate into all the member states' languages, at least if one of the accepted languages is used for the offering documents. So that's also absolutely beautiful, and typically it's the English language which everyone would most likely continue using. And the ability to invest privately. So you see, up to this point, also one of the big reasons why this regulatory requirement from the community came about is because oftentimes the platforms tended to showcase their own projects, and that was wrong. So crowdfunding service providers are supposed to be the third party in the whole play, providing independent services, so they should not be proposing and showcasing their own private projects. So that's going to clean up the industry quite a bit. But this does not disallow us as service providers to actually invest in the showcased project, which is great, because what do we do when we search for great projects? We actually search for those projects that we would be willing to invest ourselves. So that's another good thing. The two-party bulletin board type of exchange is another very positive development. So not only the regulator allows it, but actually promotes it. So as long as it's not a multilateral trading environment, but at least a minimum two parties can exchange the interest in the holdings, that's fine. That's very good that it's being actually promoted for liquidity purposes, for various reasons.
The current state of play of crowdfunding in Lithuania, I think, is very different from how it emerged in most of the European countries. That is mostly awarded to early regulation that came into the market. And by having regulation from very early days, which is like almost 5 years now, what we achieved is that crowdfunding is not seen as a get-rich-quick alternative. It's not seen as cryptocurrencies market. More likely, investors as well as project owners who reach out to crowdfunding are looking at it as an alternative financing or investing source which yields mid-single-digit returns. So I believe it's mostly related to early regulation, and the market has a lot of trust, yet we still need to get it more mainstream and more acquainted people with it.
My 3 recommendations for a project owner who is considering financing their project through crowdfunding are: firstly, honesty is the best way to do business. Make your project clear and transparent so that the investor is able to make an educated decision. This will enable the investor to find the right project for their perspective. and be confident that the risk-reward ratio is right for him or her. If a bank has refused investing, and this is the reason you are seeking financing through crowdfunding, please reassess the project to make sure that this is viable. In case of failing in crowdfunding, it will be difficult to receive additional financing elsewhere for your next ventures. Secondly, consider the life cycle of financing. The total interest paid depends on a lot of the time frame of taking out the loan. Take the loan out in parts according to the actual need of the project. That could save you a lot of interest costs. Also, splitting the loan into parts is likely to lower your interest because this enables to build trust as the investor can see the successful completion of the parts of the project. Be aware of the high contract costs. Banks have usually much lower contract compared to crowdfunding platforms. And thirdly, crowdfunding platforms are a good channel for marketing your project. Since crowdfunding platforms send out the information about the project to all their members, not only investors get notified, but the whole client base of the platform. As a result, you may not only find investors, but also clients for your project.
Then, and even today, and today perhaps even more than before, is the fact that platform needs to gain trust, because it's a marketplace where it's both the project owners and investors need to get trust in their counterparty, the platform, to work with. So for us, it took more than 3 years to actually reach a point where we feel trusted by our investors. And from seeing other platforms in different countries operating, we think that actually it's 3 years term is something, a magic number that everyone will have to get over with. When it comes to the question whether crowdfunding platform is a marketplace or an investment partner, there is perhaps no right answer. And it comes mainly because the market is young and it's still not clear which of the models is more correct. Because the first one, where platform operates only as a marketplace, as a bulletin board, allows much more diverse investment opportunities, and investors have much more choice to make of. However, the drawback of it is that most of these investors are retail investors for whom it's the first time experience of investing. Thus, they lack experience, and sometimes it might be that they make decisions that are not at their best interest. And the second concept, the second model, where platform operates as an investment partner for an investor, is perhaps, in our opinion, a more favorable one, because it allows platform to gather knowledge and experience in some particular field, which then translates into better selection for investors. So investors, they still can make their final call for what is suitable for them. However, the choice that they have to make from is already pre-selected, and perhaps limits the risks that they have to take.
My 3 recommendations for an investor who has not yet tried crowdfunding are: first, due diligence is your responsibility, regardless of the due diligence performed by the platform. Assess the risks related to location and other aspects of the project. How much from the total investment is provided by the developer, The larger it is, the smaller the risk. Is the developer planning to get financing from other sources in addition to crowdfunding? Is the loan guaranteed by developer, and how? Is it mortgage-based, by personal guarantee? And check the background of the developer and their previous completed project. So do your own due diligence. Secondly, start small to lower the risk and gain some experience with the system. Give yourself the time to develop your own personal investment strategy. And thirdly, diversify, in particular as a starting investor.
My recommendation would be to the regulator, look at the actual players themselves. A risk-based approach onto what the players in the market actually are doing. Don't go by the book, by the letter, but see effectively what are these companies trying to achieve. Because for us as a company, already in the market for 3 years, the hardest thing that we're finding ourselves in is the fight against the previous scam projects that have, inundated this place, Baltics in specific. I'd say be more vigilant in terms of who are the market players that you're dealing with, and keep an eye on them. Even though until now we lived in a, so to speak, unregulated environment, that doesn't mean that the regulator should completely ignore these players.
If I were a financial supervisor, I would be in favor of the following philosophy. Any action of the supervisor to increase investor awareness for investors making better investment decisions is welcome, while introducing additional requirements should be avoided to minimize additional hurdles to potential new market participants.
The first thing that I would have thought of would have been regulation, and happily we had it here, and now we have it all across Europe. Now when we have that and we have some experience working with being regulated, I think that as a supervisor I should think of crowdfunding as a modern way of investment services, meaning that it's no longer local. It should be seen as something like e-commerce, which is borderless. We don't know which country we are shopping at when we go shopping online. We just write a web domain and buy shoes, computers, phones, bicycles. So with crowdfunding, it should be very much the same, and I think that it will be a challenge for regulators to find a right blend of how to make these platforms benefit local markets, as well as to allow them to grow internationally, so that being a small country, like all of the Baltics are, so being in a small country would not limit the opportunities that these crowdfunding platforms could bring to the countries that they are growing from.
If I may just for a warm up, maybe something caught your attention the most from what is being said.
Thank you, Edgar. Maybe just to add one simple thing. Of course, if crowdfunding brings a lot of innovation and new approach, and if we look globally, we have to open this market for SME companies, and that is absolutely the right approach. Actually, there is no such a financial service that you could not get only in a bank right now, right? You can offer it and get it from the different institution. But one thing across the crowdfunding I was reflecting during those presentations was that it should not be considered that crowdfunding is a less responsible lending. I would say that it is one of the type of the issues that crowdfunding service providers or even crowdfunding project owners are thinking, that if I'm going to the crowdfunding, it doesn't seem to the bank, but if you have to keep in demand, but you have the same financial risk as a project owner, same business risk as a project owner, but however, in the banking sector, we still see, for example, well standardized approach how to deal with the debt collection or if something goes wrong. So I will encourage crowdfunding service providers, of course, to develop the business. And of course, we see that the landscape is a way that the scalability are put it in the first place, and nobody wants to get in or stuck in the Baltic only. The service providers look globally. It's the right approach. But one another thing is that, of course, the investor protection and the regulation put it in the right order with the several instruments that we have. And another thing I want to have to underline is financial literacy. Because what we saw during the last 3 years, how the investment behavior has changed in a good manner. Because if you look into the statistic deeper, who are those investors in crowdfunding platforms? The majority of them will be still the persons who are not professional and not sophisticated. And thanks to new regulations that, first of all, distinguish what is crowdfunding, because we have a P2P market, we have investment firm, we have a lot of other stuff. First of all, they distinguish what is lending and equity crowdfunding, and another thing, what is the investor sophisticated and non-sophisticated, and how this investor who is not sophisticated should be treated and protected. And of course, there will be a lot of business opportunities around the Europe on the map, and we will see also more platform consolidation on the market on a cross-border level and more specialization. The platform will also be more specific on what type of the customers they want to attract or working in a specific industry.
How it looks from Lithuania, you already had the regulation, as I understand, before this one, and the market participant from Lithuania also emphasized it on several occasions. So what's your perspective on what first thoughts about what was being said?
Lithuanian market participant, I think that he was a little bit proud of our legal environment here, and I think that there's something to be proud and to be happy about, because there's no cultural shock for our market here, because market participants of crowdfunding where they're used to regulation, they're used to be regulated and to some tightness of their actions, for example, that they are being observed, monitored, they are being licensed, and they have obligations, not only instead of before their clients, but also before us, the supervisor. So I think that the transition from national bespoke regulation to the European regulation will be maybe a little bit less challenging and a little bit less stressful for market participants. So I find it as a good news for Lithuania, and now I think that our market participants find it good for them too.
It means that they are more prepared, some have some competitive advantage over us.
Let's hope that.
So how it looks from Estonia, many innovations come from Estonia. So how are you in terms of crowdfunding? Is it something in the pipeline already? What are you bracing for?
Thank you. I'll take this advice to regulators, because usually we don't get any public advice, and so I will take a few comments about that. First comment was about that regulators should look this actual players. I mean, that's a very fair point. That's something I think we will definitely do, because for example, those internal rules which these entities now have to have in place, I mean, those are just not a piece of papers. They have to reflect all this business, what is going on, and all the risks must be covered with internal rules. So, and I mean, we definitely will look at actual players in the markets. A second advice was about this: give advice to investors, but don't have so much regulation or requirements in place. I mean, that's a little bit controversial, because all the regulation was given to protect, I think, mostly the investors, but there should be some requirements as well. and that all are in place because of the investors. I think so. And the third one was about this to take this the new model as a modern investment service, and I mean that's fair because we don't have this regulation in place, haven't had so far, and what we see that this is one of the modern investment services, and I think we will take it as is. And
okay, thanks for sharing your view. But speaking of you as supervisors, you definitely probably have already developed or discussed internally your what will be the focus of supervision. So you mentioned already some things, maybe also some of the colleagues from Latvia, Lithuania could elaborate on this. What would be your hot topics in supervision, because considering the systemic risks, reputational risks, IML risks, and so on. So if you of course can disclose them, and it's so far as you can.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I can start. Well, actually, I would divide this question into two parts. So what would be our supervision focus, and another what kind of issues or risk we see in addition. Of course, the new entity, the crowdfunding platform, shall be treated in the same way as any market participant according to the regulations. And we already know that one of the first and key factor in a supervision process will be understanding and supervision of safeguarding the accounts and management of those accounts. So the business model itself that deals with a document that already mentioned that it should be converted to the working business process, how it is applied, flow of funds, how the prudential requirements are filled, the quality of the portfolio. It is one also the key factor because there are lots of triggers and the red flags when you can see during the operating, how the scoring model is established, how the auto-invest solutions work, so it doesn't work, or individual portfolio management, how properly are evaluated the crowdfunding projects itself. I mean, the due diligence that has been done according to the regulations, the crowdfunding service provider have to collect a lot of additional information regarding the project. Of course, the onboarding of the investors and project owners, conflict of interest, and one of the key documents that already also have been mentioned for the market participants is the key investment information sheet. So how properly it is described, because it is a special format and it should be one of the key documents that investor could open, and it should not be hidden fees or hidden information or hidden risks. And of course, the calculation of disclosing rate and the security risk. If we were going deeply into the systemic or reputational sides, of course, the reputation of the project owners and reputation of the crowdfunding service providers is one of the points we will definitely put more attention, because we had the story on the Baltic with a different and fair platform practice. Now the reputation should be evaluated much more properly. And also one of the systemic risks we see that according to the new regulation, crowdfunding service providers have to work according to the payment arrangements. So it means that platform has now to become also the payment institution or cooperate with the payment institution to be an agent of the payment institution. And in our opinion, the more convenient, of course, for any platform to get this agent status of the payment or electronic money institution. But what we see that the majority of the companies, they're choosing almost the same payment service provider for the services. So it means that the risk could be accumulated for one specific electronic money institution who holds the accounts of operation. We also see that the banks may be less ready to develop special procedures or services to open an account for the project owners, for investors, as if for example, the business model is applicable and the developers see the banking as their own partners. And of course, the investor mitigation part. So the sustainability test, the early warning signals, the performance of simulation, that is quite crucial, especially for non-sophisticated customers, and the right of pre-contractual reflection of the period. Those 4 days that are currently are given by the regulation is quite crucial. It has not been introduced before. And now we understand that those investor protection also will be working not on the macro level, but also on the micro level. So now currently in Latvia, we are working on the more detailed framework. But of course, I assume that after 2 years of operation, we will get more practice in real life, and also from our colleagues in Europe, in order to improve the supervision framework, and also it will be more clarity on interpretation of some specific details.
Okay, thanks. In Lithuania, considering that you already have some experience, how it looks from your side about the priorities in supervision, and also how to catch the bad guys, those who are rotten apples.
My colleague Maureen explained in very detailed way, so it's hard to add something more because she tackled all those things that should be stressed. And I don't know if we still have some advantage because we have our own bespoke regulation. I think that our colleagues also have enough experience with that kind of crowdfunding service providers. Nevertheless, there's no some specific regulation there. So, but still, I maybe would like to stress and look at this situation from the helicopter view and stress the reputation of the sphere itself. And what we've experienced from our supervision experience from 2016, so reputation is crucial thing here. And as Martina Stankevičius said, they gained their trust in the market in 3 years. Do you understand that? 3 years, it's a long time, I think. It's long way to go. And reputation should not be lost. And for market participants, it's very crucial to work and to provide services in such a way that not to hinder the whole sphere of crowdfunding. For example, we in our practice, we know that this sphere, this industry is very young and it's very sensitive. So the clients, the same unsophisticated retail clients, they sense every single thing and little thing, every news, especially if it's not a good one, and they can get scared and just lose their interest in this industry, in this investment sphere like that. So we should be very cautious from the market participant side. They should examine or foresee their steps, their future steps, and evaluate them if those steps won't hinder their reputation. And we, as a supervisors, we have an obligation to also to react very carefully. We shouldn't just apply sanctions when there's no need for that, when there can be a dialogue between a supervisor and a market participant. And we've done that, and we know that this is possible. And from our experience, I can just say that market participants in this sphere, the crowdfunding service providers, those platforms, they are like a Z generation, if I could say like that. They want to have a dialogue, and they make that dialogue work. So if there's a very good synergy between the market and the supervisor. So I think if we will work together for the benefit of for this industry to strive and to blossom, so it can happen like that.
Okay, yeah, that might be that is important. Reputation, you can lose it in a second, and finance without reputation, you actually can't get anything, nor you can get to accounts, neither to to attract the new customers. See, maybe you in Estonia, maybe you have discussed maybe internally with what might be the priorities for supervision and maybe some issues you have seen until this point, maybe that would and how they might be tackled in the future.
Yeah, we have had discussions internally about those key priorities, and maybe I'm just giving you some examples about which we are focusing on. First of all, I think about the service, about the deepness of the service of the service providers. I mean, the market is new to us as well, because we are the field is regulated from 10th of November. What kind of service is provided to whom? Who are the targeted clients, the project owners? Who are the possible investors? I mean, this is one of the field we make deep dives in any cases. It's on our table. Second issue, I think, which we are looking into is about this, how to say, empty shell or empty license, and those outsource issues. I mean, how much is outsourced outside the business? How much is this capability of the entity itself? How much he relies on the other entities? I mean, this is one of the focus and key issues for us, because we don't want to be a supervision or supervisor who has, how to say, empty license entities in Estonia, and that's one of the key issue, I think. Third issue is about those internal rules. I mean, because we are just building up this this regulational framework, all the information about, I think the most important is about all this conflict of interest questions, criteria, how the projects are onboarded, how the suitability of the management has been done, and so on, so on. So that kind of internal rules should be in place, and the rules should mirror definitely the business itself, because we have had practices that different subjects will send you almost the same internal rules, and we are asking it, how is it possible? Because internal rules should be just made to you, and it should reflect your life, but it shouldn't be, how to say, inconvenient method that you have the same rules to all the participants. And definitely IT capabilities. I mean, we will assess the IT capabilities, but it all is in compared to the business model as well. I mean, the complexity, the more the business model is complex, the more we will ask the questions in those fields. Definitely, there will be other issues as well, but I think those maybe 4 or 5 are the most. And of course, the business model itself should reflect all the heart. It is, as we think, the heart of the business, and all those issues should be reflected in the business model as well. I mean, maybe those are the main key features from our side.
Thanks that you mentioned outsourcing, because what I've noticed from my legal practice that in Latvia, supervisor is very focused on outsourcing when it comes to banks, but Estonia, you're very focused on outsourcing when it comes to other entities, and there's a point here about this shell license. That's a good point. So it gets the more understanding how the Baltic market works, which supervisor is focused on which issue. But speaking of the regulation, so maybe the easy question, the first one would be, do you still see the room for regulatory arbitrage, that someone will be looking for the jurisdiction which might be like more suitable for the company or the project owner? Is this just how welcoming would be the FSA would be, or it's just there might be some national regulation in place as well? Who from you would be the volunteer to start this one? Marina, looks like you've switched on the mic.
Yeah, I can start. I think that when we are also discussing with the colleagues during the working group regarding the arbitrage on the regulation part, there were a lot of let's say question with no similar answer For example, of course, we understand that now it's too early to judge because there is no forms of market practice on how it works cross-border. From one point, we see that now this cross-border operation will be simplified. From other side, we see that there are some other countries who are introduced this national regulation, for example, in Germany, Lithuania, and they'll have this transitional period for those platforms, how it will be arranged and how long the companies will be operating until they are authorized to work under new regulation. But another thing and debatable issue that we also are observed working in working groups with the colleagues is AML requirements for crowdfunding platform. Now in Latvia, at least, they are not an entity for AML, but as far as we know, the position in EU member states are quite different. And of course, we will see maybe after a couple of years or 3 years, some kind of samples issuance on market practice, and it possibly will be, I'm not saying introduce new regulation, but it possibly will be open discussion. Shall we review this issue or how it is organized or how transparent it is? So after the market practice is established, I think we will get some specific requirements on interpretation for example, secondary market, how secondary market shall be worked, because, for example, in Latvia here, we're still receiving a lot of questions of how to arrange it in a proper way. There should be some marketing activities that could be defined more properly, because in the European member states, there are several national level acts that are limit, for example, the advertisement activities of investor services or specific customer group. I assume that we will also see the changes in a long term in a reporting standards that could be developed in a better way. For example, now we don't want to change anything, and of course we want to facilitate the development of the industry, and those reporting standards that are introduced in a regulation are quite simple and not produce any administrative burden to the crowdfunding service provider. However, we see there is a lot of room of improvement in that side. And also it could be more feedback from the industry regarding the RTS standard application. There are plenty of them, like not only the majority of them, of course, is the major of the conflict of interest, the business continuity plan, but we want to also see how this business continuity will work in a real life. So there are some also issues I think will be definitely be out of the application of the standards.
Okay, so IML issues, advertising issues. So there might be still some room for regulatory arbitrage here. How it looks from Estonian perspective? Same issues, other issues on top of them.
Yes, thank you about this the question about the regulatory arbitrage. I mean, it's a tricky one because in one side you have this EU-wide harmonized regulation, but on the second side you have this cultural and regulational background, and maybe even some competition between the regulators and states as well. I mean, this is the tricky point about this regulatory arbitrage. But considering the legal framework which is in place now, also quite a lot of technical criteria from ESMA and EBA. I mean, the framework should be quite similar in most of the EU states. But as a regulator, I mean, I appreciate that there will be roof and floor with the regulation, but saying that there will be discretion between this roof and floor as well. And that's normal, I think, and that's reasonable to have some peculiarities in some details. Therefore, I think that and hope that some difference will stay, some competition regarding states will stay, but it should be reasonable and lawful as well. And I mean, we all will win if we have some competitional element as well during this roof and floor.
Okay, thanks, Jovita.
Well, minor differences create a field for competition. Big differences create a regulatory arbitrage, I think. So I hope that just minor differences and will stay and will arise. As Marina said, it's hard to now to foresee what will happen, but I think there will be some sphere, some field for regulatory arbitrage, and I just hope that there won't be big one. So, as for example, if there are some differences in, let's say, AML requirements, so let it be. They can be, for the sake of the competition, where to go, where to apply for the license and so on. But I do hope that there won't be differences in the perspective of the in the maybe how the regulator sees the scope of the regulation. And I think that the regulators will see in the same way or very similar way. For example, they will define in the same way who is the project owner, who is the what are the, let's say, what is the main function of the platform operator itself, the service provider. So I hope that there won't be any differences here, and I hope that the European Commission and ESMA will help us as regulators to see all those very important key points in the same way, in order to diminish the possibility for regulatory arbitrage.
So, and let me continue with you asking one more question about, are there any crowdfunding, or I should say that's like crowdfunding platforms or former crowdfunding platforms of consumer lending platforms, if I may call them this way, which fall outside the scope of new regulation, but they are operating at the moment or have been operating until this juncture. So are there any in Estonia that, like, different model, they advertised themselves as crowdfunding, but actually they are not crowdfunding platforms according to the new definition, or unless the definition provided by the regulation?
We don't have so good overview about the market because we have the new market is from the 10th of November, and I think we can give an answer next year if the year is passed. Then who has came to us and acquired the license, who did not, and I think after that period, I think it's valid to say about, is there any models that doesn't fall into the regulation? So far, we have estimation that around 14 players are in the market from our view, and hopefully most of them are coming to having this license.
Okay, thanks. Marina, Latvia might be a little different, as we have some billion worth companies working like crowdfunding platforms, but actually they are not such platforms according to the regulation. Am I right?
Yeah, we have different markets to the structure that historically has happened, and it's good that currently this new crowdfunding regulation distinguish what is crowdfunding, what is not. And what we had in Latvia, we have so well known investment firms who were actually investing in loan originators who will be where the final borrower is a private person. And this topic was quite hot during the last 2 years in Latvian regulation. And as you observed, we have managed to regulate those investment firms under IBF license or credit institution license. Currently, those billion companies who are working and continue to work got the licenses as investment brokerage firms, and we have fully distinguished them from the crowdfunding services. In regard to consumer business lending, there is no currently common framework for consumer financing across the crowdfunding in Latvia. And as you know, European Union is open this question. It's currently on the table. But according to our frameworks, the consumer financing that is not crowdfunding is regulated and regulated by another regulatory authority with our customer protection service. And those large platforms currently got the brokerage licenses that will also somehow will, I hope, restore their industry reputation and give more confidence to investors who are dealing with the platform, because they have a huge number of investors across the European Union, and we could not afford having huge market player that works across globally, not only on European side, but also in other countries without any regulatory framework. So currently in Latvia, there are some new platforms that are going to be established under new crowdfunding regulations, and we are in a good dialogue with them. They're coming to Innovation Center for the advisory, showing the business models and describing how they're working. And those large companies currently are licensed under the other regulations. So we manage it in that way.
Okay, how about Lithuania? Are there any players who are not covered by the new regulation, but you still need to apply some national rules, or this is not the case in your market?
Yeah, it's not the case in our market, but luckily it's just because of the fact that the new regulation is practically the same as our bespoke regulation of crowdfunding sphere. So it's an easy way out, and we are happy that we have the exact, almost the same requirements laid down in our Lithuanian regulation of the crowdfunding sphere. So there were some cases when market participants, well, future market participants, or just subjects from the market, they tried to provide services which, to our mind, just do not fit in the regulation, in the crowdfunding regulation in Lithuanian and also into the European. As Marina said, the same activities with real lending and using a crowdfunding platform. For that, we don't think that it is that crowdfunding regulation is suitable for such activity. It's more like a credit institution activity, and there were such cases and some when they were trying to get licensed, and we still get some applications now, because when the regulation is coming, so market participants from other countries where there were no regulation, no legal environment there, they come to us and they are just fishing for better decisions for them. So we do say no, and we do say that you should adapt your model to new requirements, or just seek for the higher license, for example, the license for credit institution. So we do not live in heaven. It's the same, but Lithuanian market participants and Lithuanian business is used to rules here, and they do not like question them. But we do get some queries and some trying from other jurisdictions.
Okay, it's good you mentioned this issue, which leads also to cross-border question, and there might be like two questions for me to ask. One might be is quite blunt. Do you cooperate on this issue, or you intend to cooperate between the Baltic states, or you see this like more national thing, and you don't need to talk to each other?
I think we definitely shall talk with each other. I think lots of it is how this competence sharing and experience sharing is adapted. And if we look into the regulation and how it works, the cross-border also, we see that the regulation as such, particular attention put to the cooperation on between FCAs. And I must admit that the regulation provides a simplified freedom of services of implementation that will require even more cooperation between the authorities. Of course, this is a well-established and simple application process and reporting and so on. But I think that due to the regulator may not require physical presence right now, according to crowdfunding regulation, I mean, in a region of operation where the services are passported, and they facilitated and operated on crowdfunding platform cross-border, it just will be much more easy, and that will require even more cooperation in that side between ESMA, between the colleagues in other FCA. It should be some challenges on application of new framework in regards to interpretation, some specifics in a national level, but anyway, the supervisors currently also are under the, I would say, in a right path going to cooperate. There are some issues that may come up on these cross-border activities. For example, what we see in equity crowdfunding case, the business model assumes that there are different customers across the European Union who are future owners of the shares, and the registration of the shareholder size could be an issue. And it is a quite open question without answer for us how to manage it in a much more better way. And we also are looking and cooperate with the market players in order to adapt it. And I think that it could be also the good point for FCAs to discuss what are those best ways how to treat the equity-based crowdfunding in order to issue the shareholders' rights when they're investing in equity. So we look on European level and on consolidation of the experiences in that area and sharing the experience. I think we have IFIF, that is a good innovation forum for facilitators when we can raise a question together and discuss. And of course, the working group that is currently working on the technical standard development is one of the platforms where we can change the views and learn from one another what are the best supervisory approaches for the group.
Thanks. Jovita, you raised the hand, so the floor is yours now.
Yeah, for me, it's very like a natural thing. We have to communicate and to share our practice and our insights. And especially now, let's say earlier, before the implementation of the European regulation of the crowdfunding sphere, it was just nice to have. And for example, we had some problems about regarding sharing the information and so on, because not all countries had their own national legislation. So if we ask, we have got nothing, or sometimes just an opinion, because when there's no regulation, so what can you say? Just maybe a personal opinion. But now we have legal framework. It's clear. Maybe it could be clarified in more detail. We are looking for that. And the communication between national service, national competent authorities and European authorities like ESMA, it is crucial, because we have to find the same side, the same view, in order to make the market work in the same way without like differences, minor, big differences.
Okay, thanks. Siim, how it looks from your side, the cooperation with Latvia, Lithuania, and other colleagues?
Yeah, I hope that there are not much challenges regarding the cooperation in Baltic and even in EU. I mean, it is in place, and I think it is very good with other sectors as well. But one fact related to this crowdfunding is that the cross-border right is not, how to say, automatic regarding this regulation, and there is a place, there is in place a process that there should be done a notifications before the cross-border services, and I mean, if there's a regulation in place, we all follow it, and I mean, I hope that all this cooperation will be smooth as it has been so far.
Okay. The one thing before the last more general question is the question that some of you also touched upon is obliged entity in regards to money laundering. So the regimes they are different in the EU countries, but would you say that would you agree that it should be like even without clear provision in the law of home country or host country that this risk should be addressed anyway in the procedures when the companies start to operate, if the platform starts to operate? Or are you more favor of the legalistic approach? No law, no large entity, no ML procedures. So, or it's just more supervisor expectation that such platform should have it, even without like clear requirement to have it. I don't know who might be the first. Maybe Sim, you have in graphical order.
Yeah, thank you about the money laundering issue. I'm glad to be the first. But about the money laundering issues, I mean the money laundering regulation and the regimes there, I think they should be always in back of your head, because this is one of the, how to say, new fields and new focuses, I think, from especially in our geographical location as well. And this is something I think maybe we are not so much focusing because of the business model, what is crowdfunding. But this is definitely one of the questions that we arise if you have some discussions with the crowdfunding entities. But we will look at also in a proportional questions as well. And I mean, but that's definitely the right question. But we have to look into the service providers as well, which kind of services they are providing and how high is the money laundering risk. But
Thanks, understandable, Marina.
I think this IML question always be a hot topic for any countries for some time more. But here I would like just to again to remind that the current business model that is described in the regulation is organized in a way that those IML risks are on a table of a payment institution or bank or someone who will arrange the services, payment services that are fully separated from the crowdfunding service provider. Actually, what we see with the regulations that crowdfunding service provider is more work as a mediator on information sharing, not going deeply into the AML issues of, for example, investors. However, I must say that the banks and payment service providers have to understand this framework from the regulation, how exactly this crowdfunding regulation works and why they have to do, how they have to do. And it could be, of course, additional burdens for bank or payment institution who will arrange those payments and who will onboard the customers. Because as we know, under these regulations, it could be different scams. For example, if you open IBAN accounts for each investor, or you are opening the project accounts, or you are opening accounts for investor transition account and account for borrower. So it is up to you to decide. So it is up to business model. However, we shall keep in mind that someone who will be care and take care on the payment arrangements should take this question. One risk that I see here is that if payment service providers or bank will be producing or offering high prices for the crowdfunding service providers, it means that we can kill the business. So the question will be, how much will it cost for the crowdfunding service provider to get those services from the payment institution? And here is a business question. However, it's quite crucial if you calculate to the majority of investors, and even you will have the very low hit ratio, very high hit ratio of the borrowers. Anyway, you have to check each and every one in order to get this borrower on a platform. So it could be the investments, huge investments from in human resources, additionally for the service provider, and also the competence level to understand how the business model or crowdfunding works. That is a very important one.
Okay, thanks. And Jovita, that's the final word on this.
Well, it's hard to say any final word after my colleagues just explained in very detail, so all pluses and minuses, pros and cons. I just want to add that well, Bank of Lithuania also always had applied AML requirements for the crowdfunding service providers earlier, and I don't think that there will be any skipping of this requirement. Of course, we will have in mind that crowdfunding service providers, they cannot act without the payment service provider. This is impossible, except the scenario when it has the license of the payment institution itself. But still, Marina said very clearly and very true, a huge true. It depends on the scheme of the activities of the synergy between the crowdfunding service provider and the payment service provider. It depends on the cooperation, the style of the cooperation. So still, in Lithuania, AML requirements will be applied to the crowdfunding service provider, but those requirements will be lighter and not that burdening as it was earlier.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. And before the really last question, the thing, Marina, you mentioned this, if I may call it, concentration risks, that you can't put all eggs in one basket. You can't say that one money institution would be able to service everyone in the market. So this also might be the case. You will be like assessing whether the concentration risk doesn't like create some sort of risks for investors or the whole project. Am I right?
Absolutely, yes, you are right. And the investor should always remember that even keeping the money on a payment service providers, it doesn't mean that you are keeping this money in a bank. It is still payment service provider, and it is a huge difference between how the banks guarantee and how the payment providers and how their business model work. What we see right now that in Europe there are a couple of very active payment institutions, electronic money institutions, who are working and they're focusing on the crowdfunding providers. Because if you look to the Italy or Germany, you will see plenty of very small providers who are specialized, for example, in a high energy, green energy, or agriculture. They could be smallest platforms. However, there are plenty of them on region-based federal rates and so on, and they are using almost the same services. So it is one of the key issues when we'll be evaluating all the third-party providers that are used by the platforms, because it is not only the payments provider, but it also could be a scoring partner who are going and offering you the knowledges or software or whatever digital platform to get the due diligence. It could be other providers that make KYC for you, for example, or onboarding the customer. So this level of concentration not only creates those systemic risks, but it also creates cyber risk management. Because imagine if something is happening with this electronic money institution for a couple of days, and you have like 500,000 investors across Europe, they without answer what is happening. And as a regulator, it's of course for us, it is important to understand who are they, how they're protected, are they in place, everything. So until you have like a couple of platforms of the market, okay, you understand and you can count them well. But when you see that on a European level, when globally they are dependent on one provider, it's quite crucial. And maybe also another thing that I would like to underline, where our focus also be evaluating the third parties, is the cyber risk management. That was much more effort we put in the banking supervision area. Now in this new segment, we'll have to understand it, how the data protected, how those cyber risks are protected, how the IT security is managed, because for those segments, they have not been supervised in that manner. However, they have the same risk with the money issues. We have the same data of the customers, and all the same risks that is included into financial services.
Yeah, sounds like something from DORA regulation should be applied to them as well. So anything to add on to what Marina has just said from Estonia, Lithuania, or just same play? Okay, so the last question, so we are almost run out of time. The last question for you is quite one, the general one, maybe I could say, the question would be as follows, that do you think that crowdfunding is just some trendy stuff to have, or it will become an integral part of our economies? Some future perspectives. Maybe I'll start with Jovita.
Well, I think that it can be both, and I hope that it can start for, especially for investors. Maybe it could seem like a trendy thing to do. Let's say invest through the crowdfunding platforms. But I hope that this will eventually create a huge industry. And I do have really grounds to believe that it will happen like that, because even the European institutions, so European Commission, stepped further and created a regulation for that. So I do hope that this industry, this sphere, will grow into something stable and into something really strong. That's my dream. Yeah, I do believe that it can happen like that.
You bet. So Sim, that's the floor is yours on this.
It's a good question about is it trendy or a part of future economy? But I mean, you can lose your money in both cases. As a regulator, I mean, it is important to be present if some risks are higher in society. And I mean, a regulator from EU has found that there should be a watchdog on that market now. And I mean, here we are.
Yeah, that's a good point about losing your money. Yeah. Marina, so you have some closing remarks today. Please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. So in regards, is it still a future? So I think that if you would like to look to the European fintech map, what we see right now, according to different types of statistics, the fintech in Europe generates from 6 to 8% from all financial sector income. Just imagine it will be 20. So if we think right now that crowdfunding is just a trend, that what we will get as a big picture after if those companies will grow. I would say that it will be changes and it will be challenging time for the crowdfunding. Some of them will be closed because for some of them it will be administratively hardly to take and to care of all those requirements that new regulation applies. Some of them will be merged or consolidated. Some of them will be finding the way of funding. But one is important fact, and I want to underline that why actually this regulation also come up to on the table, that it is a part of the financing, and it is opportunity not only for investors who have to diversify the investment risk, because who is investors? They are persons who are diversifying. They have things they have invested in crowdfunding, something in crypto, somewhere in shares, options, stocks, and so on and so on. It is only one part for them, but from the other part, it is a huge market for MSME companies. And if we look right now for what is happening on the European market and how, for example, SME are financing in Germany, the majority of SME are financed outside of the banking sector. And this crowdfunding is also a part of the economy. And we see such examples that is really working. If we look into Latvia, of course, we have a very good, stable, big four, let's say, banks who are quite openly look to the economy. However, we see a lot of also SME companies who still could not get access to the financial services in our local banks. And for them, it is a very good opportunity where they get the financing, because banks may treat some customers as a high-risk customer for example, working in the trading or working in some specific industry, but still high-risk customer doesn't mean bad business. It means that you have to find the way, you have to find the financing in some special manner, or you need to get the money fast. And it will take like 2 weeks from bank to take a decision, are you will be the borrower or not. I would say that there are a lot of projects like bridge financing that also are outside the banking sector for SME companies, but they still need those access to finance. And of course, the short-term loans for the trading. So if we look into the regulation, I think that, yeah, the sector is quite young, and we will see definitely some changes after 3 years. But it is got also opportunity not only how to protect investor, but also have a good opportunity how to get the possibilities for SME companies to get those additional financing outside the banking sector. It's a good practice, I would say.
Okay, thank you very much, every one of you. We, on behalf of Cobalt, we really appreciate having you here today. I think that we managed to not only to deal with several policy issues, but also look under the veil of the supervision. What are you tend to do? What's your look on issues the businesses might encounter with? So many thanks, really appreciate, and hopefully we'll be here again after some time, maybe not here in the Zoom platform, but at some venue, like to continue FinReg tradition and then have some discussions on other topics. And also we could then consider that crowdfunding effort in the Baltics have succeeded. So hopefully this will be the case.
Thank you for participating and listening to our FinReg event on crowdfunding. And I think it was really interesting to hear the perspective from the market participants, and especially taking into account that we have 3 different markets and we have completely different situations in Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. And that was very well reflected by the regulators in the discussion, that there are different challenges that each country will face when trying to meet and to implement the new crowdfunding regulation brought up by the EU Commission. I think that, each country will have its of course, own challenges and ways to solve it. And Lithuania, although it seems that, it should be very little issues to deal with, still will have tasks to complete. But I think what is important is that we remember what was said during the panel discussion and by the market participants, that firstly, we should always, remember that crowdfunding is about trust. Trust from the investors, trust from the project owners, and all the market participants that are already here or are willing to enter the market, and the regulators, they should always think of the trust and confidence to keep in the market. On the other hand, keeping the trust of the market does not need to push for over-regulation, as we usually discuss in the finance industry. There still need to be quite room for innovation, because crowdfunding is about innovating and bringing new models to the market. So all the challenges that were discussed today, AML, money remittances and things like that, they should not kill the idea that the crowdfunding is there to supplement the alternative finance models and offer to the market new products, and on the same time keeping the confidence in the crowdfunding tool as such. Thank you for listening. Hope it was interesting to hear, and I really look forward to meeting in spring and see how the crowdfunding regulation was truly implemented and had effect on all 3 Baltic states.